What's up, guys? Welcome back to the MMA meeting. Let's talk with the Weasel podcast, where we talk all things MMA. And let's jump right into it. So, the big news. Ben Askren announced his retirement from the sport. And say what you want. Now, I know I was one of the biggest critics of Ben Askren when he got signed to the UFC. I didn't give him much of a chance in the UFC ranks. And even though he came out 1-2 out of his UFC fights, the only win being a very controversial finish where he was pretty much getting beat up in the fight, you cannot deny the guy's toughness. You cannot deny that he put his money where his mouth was. You remember when he called out the entire division, and he actually went by that. So he fought Robbie Lawler, he fought Jorge Masvidal, he fought Damian Maia, and these are not easy fights at all. You could say Robbie Lawler, older in his career, but that was his first fight in the UFC where he was pretty much not tested that much outside of it. Yes, he fought Douglas Lima. Yes, he fought Andrei Koreshkov, but that was so long ago. Very hard to make that relevant to today's standards when you look at his skill set and his quality as a fighter comparing to today's standard of fighters. But he did not stand back. He wanted the best fighters, he called them out, and he fought some of the best fighters in the UFC. Even though a lot of them were going to be bad stylistic matchups for him. He wanted to fight GSP as well. Khabib, many really tough fights for him. And announcing his retirement seems like a pretty good thing. He came out of retirement to test himself against the best fighters, and then needs like a hip replacement surgery or something like that, and that's pretty bad. I don't know how long he's had it. I mean, he's been wrestling for a very long time, so maybe even early on in his wrestling career he's had this hip injury, because we all know how hard wrestling is on the body. And if he fought his whole MMA career, or even, let's say even half of his MMA career with that hip injury, you got to give him even more credit for going through all this. So I have to give my respect to Ben Askren. He definitely made things more fun than I expected him coming into the UFC. Shook things up just a little bit, And that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the fans. It was interesting. It was entertaining. And I wish him a very successful post-career adventure. And speaking of Douglas Lima, so we all know Douglas Lima beat Roy McDonald, and he fought a lot more convincingly than last time. People could chalk that up to Roy McDonald not being the same fighter mentally. That could be part of it, but nobody could deny that Douglas Lima is getting better, and Douglas Lima is one of the best welterweights on the planet right now. And I still see some people that throw shots at him. They lost to Ben Askren before, and they say, look what happened to Ben Askren in the UFC. You think Douglas Lima is going to do any better? But then again, MMA math doesn't make any sense. And Douglas Lima fought Ben Askren 7 years ago, right? It's a long time ago. That's like saying you can take shots at Anderson Silva because he lost to Ryo Chonin or something like that. It's kind of ridiculous at this point. 7 years ago, you're going to hold a loss against a fighter when they were a lot easier to beat, when they were nowhere near the skill level. They had nowhere near the mental stability that they have today, the veteran experience, fighting elite competition. And Douglas Lima, even in Bellator, has fought some really stellar competition. And I wish one day him and, is it Patricio or Patricio? The featherweight champion who just won the lightweight championship against Michael Chandler, that Pitbull brother, and Douglas Lima, I want to see them in the UFC, or at least have a crossover fight. I know the UFC won't do it because it doesn't make sense for them. They don't get anything out of it. It's mainly Bellator's benefit, because if Douglas Lima goes and wins, which is the best case scenario, he goes back to Bellator, and now the UFC is looked at as not the best organization completely, and there are better fighters out there, right? The casual audience, the semi-hardcore audience, they all believe that UFC is by far heads and shoulders above any other MMA organization, and they cannot risk that, right? Because the truth is, anybody can lose. We look at Eddie Alvarez moving to one championship. He gets knocked out in his first fight, right? We look at Sage Northcutt fighting a kickboxer who's pretty one-dimensional, and he gets starched in the first round. And Ryzen, I believe, right? We do see Bellator fighters come into the UFC, but as UFC fighters, and some of them do very well. Right, this has been throughout time, with Strikeforce, Pride, WEC especially. WEC, of course, was the beginning of the weight classes below lightweight for the UFC, so it's a little bit different. But we've seen it time and time again. Fighters from different organizations go into the UFC, and they do very well. This is why a lot of people thought that Pride and Strikeforce compared to the UFC, because we actually saw them fight each other. Bellator, we rarely ever see it. And I do believe Douglas Lima would be a top 5, at the least top 7 welterweight in that division in the UFC. And I think Pitbull can also be there as well in the featherweight division. It's just a shame we'll probably never see it unless Douglas Lima leaves Bellator and goes into UFC. I don't think he's ever going to do that. He's not old, but he's in like those prime years. So if he's not going to do that now, it might be too late, we'll say 2, 3, 4 years from now, to really understand how good he actually was. And that's the biggest thing about Bellator fighters. We don't actually know how great they are unless they fight the absolute best fighters in the world. We know Douglas Lima is one of the best because he beat Rory McDonald. We know where Lovato Jr. stands because he fought Gegard Mousasi and beat. We always knew that Michael Chandler was a very good fighter, and Pitbull went up a division and knocked him out easily early in the fight. So some of these guys we do know because they link the competition up into each other. Michael Chandler going to war with Alvarez, and Alvarez becoming that champion in the UFC later. The only way you're going to actually compete with Alvarez is if you actually are a great fighter. And now I do know that we have a 3-week gap until the next UFC card, which is going to be UFC on ESPN 7. Alice Overeem versus Rozenstruik, which is like the most veteran versus prospect that you'll ever get in the UFC. When we're talking about Alistair Overeem, who has over 60 fights professionally, later end of his career, versus Rozenstruik, who doesn't even have 10 fights in his career and is undefeated, right? This is like the perfect veteran versus prospect fight you'll ever get. And it's very hard to tell who's going to win because when Rozenstruik fights, he puts people out with shots you never think would put people out. A jab in his first fight. Short and didn't look too powerful of a left hook on Andrei Arlovski, but he has that kind of power. And Overeem, who has the chin that he has, it's going to be dangerous for him, man, in any given moment. Moves in a little bit too much. Zigs when he should have zagged. Moves left when he should have moved right. And Rozenstruik will land that big shot. Doesn't have to be a big shot. It could be a jab or something like that because we know he has that kind of power, and that could be it for Overeem for that fight. And that will put Rozenstruik toward the top of the division. And we need more prospects in the heavyweight division because they're all very old, But the rest of the card doesn't look the greatest. You do have Song Yadong. Carlos Condit was scheduled to fight Mickey Gall, and that was sad in one way, to be honest, for Carlos Condit. Former multiple-time title challenger, former interim champion, fighting some of the best welterweights in the world, to can't even get a win. Right, it's almost similar to Renan Barao, but not as bad. Renan Barao had the biggest fall from grace ever in the UFC. Going from who a lot of people thought pound for pound number one fighter in the world. I know Dana White thought that mostly, but there were other people that repeated that narrative to being a guy who just can't win at all. Like he's just getting destroyed by guys he shouldn't be getting destroyed by. Guys without Wikipedia pages who don't even go and do well in the UFC, and he can't even beat those guys. But Carlos Condit is one of the next ones, right? There's Renan Barao, there's Johnny Hendricks, and then I think there's Carlos Condit. He's coming off 5 losses in a row. His last win was against Thiago Alves, and that was in 2015. And Thiago Alves isn't doing well in his career. So in his last 10 fights, he only has 2 wins. Martin Kampmann, Thiago Alves. The Martin Kampmann win was pretty good, where he got shut down by GSP. He got shut down by Johnny Hendricks. He got stopped by Tyron Woodley. I know a lot of people say, but Carlos Condit hurt his knee. I don't take that, man. Tyron Woodley took him down, hurt Carlos Condit's knee, and then kicked the opposite knee, causing the injured one to rotate. That's all Tyron Woodley. That's not Carlos Condit. That's not really Carlos Condit making a mistake. He, I think, took in a butterfly hook as he was getting taken down by Woodley. And, Woodley's a tank on top of you. It smashed on top of the leg. I think he probably noticed it, kicked out the other leg, and turned the knee, and that was it. I think that's a legitimate win for Tyron Woodley, to be honest. Unless, Carlos Condit stepped wrong and that's what happened, then it's something different. But it's actually something Woodley did. He took action and caused the injury himself. If Henry Cejudo lost his fight to Demetrius Johnson because of the leg injury, let's say something similar, he can't stand anymore, it was Demetrius Johnson that did that. He was kicking the legs, and he caused that to happen, right? Look at Jared Cannonier versus Anderson Silva, right? You got to give it to Jared Cannonier. He kicked the leg and hurt it and injured it. That's how hard he kicked it. People don't really bat an eye when someone gets their jaw broken or something like that, and then they call it off. People are like, oh yeah, he won. He broke his jaw. But what's the difference with kicking out someone's leg and injuring it? Same thing. You're causing an injury with a blow. It's just not something you normally see because it's harder to injure a leg when you're taking action. But when you do so, you got to give that guy credit for how hard they kicked it, like Jared Cannonier. The takedown as well as kicking it like Tyron Woodley did. It just all goes into the game. And then Carlos Condit fought Thiago Alves. I think it was with that step-in elbow that ended the fight. And then he fought Robbie Lawler, which was actually a very good fight. Almost beat him. A lot of people thought that he beat Robbie Lawler, and that could be considered a prime Robbie Lawler, and a prime Robbie Lawler is one of the greatest welterweights of all time. And then his fall happened right after that, getting submitted easily by Damian Maia, which I thought was a terrible fight for Condit. Condit's known to have one of the worst takedown defenses in the entire game. Took him down easily, submitted. He fought Neil Magny. A lot of people thought that Condit should be able to win that one. Got outstruck, got out-wrestled especially. He fought Alex Oliveira, which is another tough fight for him. Got submitted. Fought Michael Chiesa, got submitted again. And a lot of people think that the big fall after that Robbie Lawler fight was because of all the damage he took from the Lawler fight. He did say when Damian Maia ground and pounded him with that one big left hand, I think, over the top, when Damian Maia was in his guard or half guard, Condit said he got rocked by that. A shot like that, Condit is known for a granite chin. But if he's getting hurt that easily by Damian Maia, it's safe to say that the damage he took from the Robbie Lawler fight was very extensive and probably hurt him in different ways, Mentally can't take a shot as well as he did before. Maybe hurt his confidence. Maybe something happened after that because I know he was contemplating retirement after Robbie Lawler fight. But he did fight not too long after, in August of that same year. So he fought Robbie Lawler in January 2nd of 2016, then fought Damian Maia in August 27 of 2016. So 7 months in between is not that long, you know? Who else do you have on the card? Ben Rothwell's fighting Stefan Struve. Marina Rodriguez is a good prospect fighting Cynthia Calvillo. Rob Font's on the card fighting Ricky Simone. That's going to be interesting. Not the best card, but something more solid than we saw last week. And then the big one. This is what I really wanted to talk about. So that UFC on ESPN 7 card is 3 weeks from now. And then we're going to have UFC 245 a week after that on December 14th. And this card is really stacked. So on the UFC website, there's 3 fights on the prelims. You do have Matt Brown versus Ben Saunders. You have Caitlin Vieira versus Irene Aldana, which is actually a really good fight. If Caitlin Vieira wins that fight, she should be the next in line for a title shot. And you have Jeff Neal versus Mike Perry, which is going to be explosive and a throwdown fest. Jeff Neal is more well-rounded. He can go for the wrestling a little bit more. But I believe he thinks that he's a better striker than Mike Perry. He's not going to allow that to happen, right? He's not going to allow Mike Perry to even show off that he can beat Jeff Neal in the striking. That's going to be a banger, man. And I'm actually glad it's going to headline the prelims. That's the kind of fight that's going to gravitate towards the casual fans. You got Petr Yan versus Uriah Faber. You got Marlon Moraes versus Jose Aldo. What the heck, man? Those 2 fights alone could headline a fight night. Especially Marlon Moraes versus Jose Aldo. That's an insane fight. Number 1 versus number 3, Jose Aldo moving down. Well, Jose Aldo's number 3 at featherweight. Faber's moving down. You do have Frankie Edgar versus Corey Sandhagen. It's the veterans from the featherweight division, old featherweight division versus the new guys of the bantamweight division. It's pretty funny. And to be honest, those 3 fights, Moraes versus Aldo, Yan versus Faber, and Edgar versus Sandhagen, that's going to really tell how the structure of the UFC is going to be when you come in terms of skills and stuff like that. Will the old veterans beat these new bantamweights out of there? And frankly, all of them were featherweights and they deserve to be in bantamweight. I wouldn't say Jose Aldo, but I guess he's moving down. I don't know what happened. I talked about it before. He did look a little bit smaller than some of those featherweights, but bantamweight seems to be a little bit too much of a cut. But that's going to be interesting. Moraes versus Aldo was very interesting for me. To be honest, I know I'm in the minority. I know 100% I'm in the minority. Moraes versus Aldo does more for me than Holloway versus Volkanovski, to be honest. I know I'm stoked for Holloway versus Volkanovski, but I'm a huge Jose Aldo fan. I'm a big Moraes fan, but the biggest thing for me is dangerous. That fight is very dangerous for both of them. When we're talking about some of the hardest hitters in the bantamweight division, the come down from Jose Aldo to bantamweight, there's so many different variables in that kind of fight than the Holloway versus Volkanovski fight, which is a little bit more straightforward. We kind of expect what that fight's going to be like. This Moraes and Aldo fight is going to test Aldo. It's going to test a young fighter like Moraes, and most likely someone's going to get put out. Both of them will answer back when they get hit. Both of them have insane takedown defense. Both of them are excellent kickers. Jose Aldo might have more power and speed. Moraes has better timing and precision. And when they throw, it's always 100%. Then you have Amanda Nunes versus Jermaine Durandamy. Now, a lot of people are looking down on this fight. A lot of people think that, Amanda Nunes is going to wreck Jermaine Durandamy, because what I usually get, and I see it all over the place, because Amanda Nunes beat Ronda Rousey, Holly Holm, Chris Cyborg, these fighters, that has nothing to do with GDR. If you think Amanda Nunes is going to go out there and just outstrike GDR, prepare to be shocked a little bit. People don't give GDR the respect she deserves. Yes, she turned on the featherweight belt, and that's the main reason why people don't respect her, or they might overlook her. But GDR has legit one-shot knockout power. She's extremely technical to a master level. She's longer and taller than Amanda Nunes, which is something Nunes hasn't fought in her career besides when she fought GDR. And she sets up things a little bit different than Nunes has ever fought up against. The way Nunes is going to win this fight is the way she won the last one. Take it to the ground, show grappling dominance. It's not going to be as easy as it was in the first fight, because Nunes as a grappler, yes, she might have gotten better, but back then she was pretty much just a grappler. And that's what she pretty much knew. She was a black belt back then, I think. So I would say her striking has greatly improved, way ahead than her grappling has. But I don't think it's enough to stifle GDR striking, right? If they stay striking, I think it's going to be pretty even. If not, I actually think GDR might have a little bit of an advantage. But she's way more one-dimensional, right? The best way for Nunes to win this fight is showcase her grappling, and that is something we don't normally see from Nunes, these days at least. I mean, she submitted Miesha Tate, but it was coming off strikes. We have to see her take down GDR, ground and pound her before that, soften her up a little bit, then probably get a rear naked choke. The last time we really saw something like that was when she fought Valentina Shevchenko the first time, and that was a long time ago. That was before either of those fighters were champions. So it's going to be an interesting fight. For people thinking that she's going to go out there and dominate the striking, I think that's a little bit crazy. So right now, my early prediction for that, I do think Amanda Nunes is probably going to win that, but it's a tougher fight than people are expecting. And we have to also remember, Nunes' takedowns aren't like a wrestler. She trips you every time. That's all of her takedowns. Get you in the clinch, trip you. Who's better in the clinch when it comes to striking? It's easily GDR. GDR dominates that area. But the biggest thing is, can Nunes get in on GDR for a clinch? Because GDR does keep a very long range on her opponent, and Nunes is going to have to make her way in through her punches. That puts her in danger for counter shots, of course, right? Especially when Nunes is looking for the takedown, looking for the clinch, instead of looking to outstrike GDR in those exchanges, right? When you're throwing punches to a takedown or punches to the clinch, your punches aren't normally as focused or as sharp as they should be when you're focusing on striking, right? And that little time lapse, that little bit of a lapse in focus of your striking can get you caught by someone like GDR. It's going to be very interesting. Very interesting. And then Max Holloway versus Alexander Volkanovski, of course, is an amazing fight. Like I said before, this is Holloway versus that old style that dominate the featherweight division, besides Jose Aldo, of course, like Frankie Edgar, Chad Mendes, Ricardo Lamas, many other fighters who had this good boxing, strong wrestling, high horsepower style. And yeah, Holloway's versing the best version of that, the 2.0 version of that style in Volkanovski. So it's going to be interesting how Holloway deals with that, with a different kind of pressure, with a different kind of power, with the cardio that Volkanovski has, a trait from many guys that Holloway has fought before. He has like that no back down style like Brian Ortega. He has the striking to wrestling style like Frankie Edgar. He has the variety of striking from punches to the head, punches to the body, leg kicks, body kicks like Jose Aldo, and maybe other things that we have never seen before, because Volkanovski is still a young fighter, very early in his career, and he's fighting a champion, one of the best champions in the featherweight division, right? But I still think Max Holloway's going to win this. I know Volkanovski has a longer reach with like a 72-inch reach on Max Holloway's 69, but he's 5 inches shorter, right? So he could potentially strike with Holloway, but Holloway, if he's going to keep range on Volkanovski, his reach might seem a little bit longer because of the height difference. And that itself can throw Holloway off a little bit, because every guy that Holloway has fought that had a longer reach than him has given him problems. From Dustin Poirier to Conor McGregor, right? And potentially Volkanovski can find ways to make his reach work in this kind of contest. And we know Holloway doesn't have the power to hurt Volkanovski that badly. Volkanovski's a dog with no step back mentality. I mean, look how he went after Chad Mendes, right? There was no quitting that guy. He was having fun as he was getting hurt. So the X factors potentially can create what's going to happen in this fight. It can pretty much make up this fight. But I think that Max Holloway is going to do very similar to what he did to Frankie Edgar here. Stick to the basics, make Volkanovski miss. The uber pressure from Volkanovski could be a little bit different for Holloway to move around. But I do think off the power shots of Volkanovski, defending them and moving out on an angle, he can get away from the cage and then make stuff work in the center of it, right? I think his entire game plan is going to be work a lot in the center, and if you're getting pressed back, slow down your output a little bit and work to get away from the cage and then pick up the volume again. And of course, the biggest fight of the card. And it's crazy because these are two of the most inexperienced champions in the UFC right now. And I forgot Colby Covington is not a champion. I keep thinking he's an interim champion every time. Well, 15-1 versus 14-1. Usman just won the belt. Covington won the interim belt not too long ago. A bit inexperienced compared to other champions. And they are the biggest fight of this entire card because they have that grudge against each other. And as many of you guys think, it is very even. Whether you hate or you like Colby Covington, because there's a lot of people on both sides of the spectrum. At this point, nobody could deny his skills. Nobody. And I've talked about this fight multiple times. I do think Usman's going to get the better of the wrestling. I think he's going to be attempting wrestling, but it could potentially cancel out because Colby can be throwing a lot of heat in front of Usman, throwing off the initial shot. When you're getting punches and knees and kicks thrown at you when you're trying to set up for a takedown, your takedown gets miscalculated or not as smoothly transitioned to, and that gets it easier to defend. And Colby being as high-level wrestler as he is, you need a perfect takedown. You need a perfect takedown. You need a perfect shot, especially when he knows that's your approach in this fight, because I think Colby's the better striker. I think he's more smooth in his striking, which is crazy to say because he's not that smooth. But Usman will throw windmills at you, right? He will swing his arms at you, and they're not too disciplined at times, especially when he threw at Tyron Woodley. At least Colby Covington sticks to the technique, sticks to the form more than Usman does. Usman has more power because we have seen him knock out Sergio Moraes with one shot. And Colby Covington's never done anything like that. The most he's ever done was spinning back fist some guy early in his career and finish off with ground and pound. But Colby Covington throws way more output, way more variety of strikes. Usman doesn't even kick much. And we do know that Colby Covington, no matter how high the pace of the fight is, he will never gas out. He can go as fast as he wants, and he'll never gas out. Will the same be for Kamaru Usman? Now, we do know that Usman has very good cardio for 5 rounds, when the fight's going at his pace, when he's where he wants to be at, right? Think about the Woodley fight, think about RDA, think about Damian Maia. How did those fights go? Who was the one that was establishing the pace of the fight and how they were going down? It was Usman. He was the aggressor. He was the one pressuring forward. He was the one that was making the fight slow or fast. He was the one dictating how the fight was going. Those were the only 5-round fights of his career, and he did pretty well with his gas tank, right? The only time I remember him really getting pushed and his pace getting disrupted was against Emil Mech, and he had a hard time with the striking because of that. And Emil Mech, I believe, is not as good of a striker as RDA or even probably Tyron Woodley. But because he was pushing Usman and fighting him back, it created a bit of a scramble and confusion for Usman, and then his wrestling started to get a little bit more panicky. And we know Colby Covington also is the one who established pace and established how fights go in his contests. And his pace is way higher than Usman's. So, I think it's pretty much safe to say that Colby's going to be the one that's going to dictate how the fight's going to go, or dictate the pace of the fight, and we do not know that Usman can last 5 rounds, with the fight mainly staying standing against the volume that Colby brings, as well as making some takedowns, as well as just making the fight chaotic. Right? We don't know how Usman's going to deal with 5 rounds of that. We do know how he deals with 3 rounds of that, and we have seen him more vulnerable than ever before against Emil Mech. How does he deal with this when he's fighting Colby Covington? Colby throws more things than Emil Mech does. He has a higher output than Emil Mech does. Mech has more power, but that's pretty much it. There's nothing else Emil Mech has that Colby Covington doesn't besides just brute power. But can you make up for that power when you're throwing 10 punches instead of 1, right? Colby Covington is going to keep throwing at Usman, and this makes it very hard to predict. Actually, when I think about it more and more, and as the fight gets closer, I am starting to side more with Colby Covington because of these aspects of the game. Usman's biggest way of winning this fight is catching Colby Covington with a big shot, but he has to be moving forward to do that, which is going to be a hard thing for him to do. And the other way is I'll wrestle Colby Covington if Covington's takedown defense isn't as good as we thought. If Usman can actually get through that defense and just keep taking him to the ground and win by a decision because of that. Those are the only 2 ways I can see Usman winning this fight. Every other way is Colby Covington winning, from constant striking, output, winning by points because of his striking, stopping the takedowns, making a stand-up fight, make Usman confused again, taking down Usman. We know Usman has 100% takedown defense, but this is the best wrestler he has fought in MMA. We know Tyron Woodley has high credentials in wrestling, but Tyron Woodley isn't the level of Colby Covington when it comes to wrestling in an MMA scene. MMA wrestling is different than amateur wrestling. So there's different ways Colby Covington can go about winning this fight. And we do know he attempts more takedowns than Kamaru Usman does. He shoots a lot more. He's a lot more active. And that's something very different for Usman. Great card, man. I absolutely cannot wait for this. And what feels even more rewarding than just watching this amazing card is to actually bet on the fights. And mybookie.ag is the place to go. Between the football seasons, NBA, the start of the college basketball season, the great MMA fights that are coming up, it's time to get off the sideline and get right into action with MyBookie. If you're the kind of guy who likes to bet a little and win a lot, try a parlay. For an example, if you believe that all the challengers are going to upset the champions, you can use all of them as a parlay. Parlays are perfect because they allow you to have multiple picks together for a much bigger payout. So if you're going to bet at this time, do the smart thing and go to mybookie.ag because no one gives you more ways to win. If you're tired of watching the fights from the couch with nothing to gain, MyBookie wants to get your mind off everything else and get back into the game. If you join right now, MyBookie will match your deposit halfway all the way up to $1,000. That means if you deposit $2,000, you get an extra $1,000 in free money to play with. You just have to use the promo code WEASEL to activate the offer. Once again, that's promo code WEASLE to take advantage of MyBookie's sign-up offer. Visit mybookie.ag today. You play, you win, you get paid. But let's go to the questions now. And we're going to go to the most liked comment by Daniel Restero. If Canelo, Gordon Ryan, and Jordan Burroughs went into MMA, who would have the most success? I'd probably say Gordon Ryan, right? Of course, he's one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artists in the world right now, especially no gi, which translates right into MMA. So he has the best means of finishing a fight without being in a dire situation or in a disadvantage, right? The striking is going to be his disadvantage, but he can take down someone, right? So he has been working on his wrestling a lot, and he has challenged people to take down only wrestling matches. Whereas Jordan Burroughs, all he has is wrestling. We don't even know that it's going to translate right into MMA because it's a different style of wrestling, and that's pretty much it. He doesn't have the striking, doesn't have the submissions, so he's more one-dimensional than Gordon Ryan. Canelo is the most dangerous when it comes to finishing someone in an instant, but he's too easily taken down, too easily controlled, too easily submitted, too easily kicked. Even in the strike, he's not going to do that well. So I will say Gordon Ryan. Then we go to Brian Historia. Did Askren hurt his legacy by coming over to the UFC? Technically, yeah. Technically, because we know where he stands. We know he's not one of the best. We know that when he fights the best of the best, he pretty much loses or greatly struggles. If he didn't come to the UFC, he would still have the mystique about him. He'll still have that question about him. How good is he actually? And when you have that question about someone, you automatically put him at a standard higher than a lot of people know about, right? Because he's undefeated, right? He beat all these guys, so he has to be good, right? He has to be because he's undefeated. But when he comes to the UFC and gets absolutely thrashed, then people put him down lower than what they had the standard as when he had that question about him. So I believe, yes, it hurt his legacy as a fighter competitively, but financially it was a great, right? I mean, he made a lot of money, made more money than he's ever made before, I believe. Probably more options outside of the sport. So I don't think it was a bad decision to go to the UFC, but I think it hurt his legacy. Then we go to Kaz Strange. Every inch of a cucumber you can get in your bum is worth $1 million. How many inches you taking? This might be the weirdest question I've ever gotten. And cucumbers are kind of pointy, right? Like thorny almost. That's a bad day, but it's $1 million. I know a lot of you guys would do it, right? A lot of people would do that. Even if it's just I'll give it 1 inch. Why not? It's $1 million for 1 inch. It's almost like wiping yourself, right? There we go to Danny D. What happens to Colby if he loses to Usman? Now, there's the competitive area. Where does he go as a fighter? And where does he go when it comes to his character and stuff like that? Because with this character, he's only been winning. So competitively, I think he still goes on. I think he still fights, tries to get back up there and win the belt. As a character, it might lighten up because this kind of stuff really only works when you're winning. If Colby was losing with this character, nobody would care about him, right? He'll be looked at as some joker in the UFC, some jester. So that will lighten up. He'll get a little bit more serious, a little bit more authentic, and then try to get up to the championship again. Then we go to Joe Allen's beard. Over the last few years, the lightweight and welterweight divisions have been consistently the best. Is this because lightweight and welterweight are about the average size of a man, therefore there's a larger pool of people who compete in these divisions? Or, number two, these divisions have the perfect balance because technical skill and physical attributes like power, speed, etc. Keep up the great content, man. Always looking for your analysis after fight night. Thank you so much, man. And I think both are true, to be honest, because lightweights and welterweights are about the size of an average person. So we're talking about no taller than 6'2", usually, besides like Neil Magny, Roosevelt Roberts. So usually no taller than 6'2", no shorter than like 5'8". The walk-around weight is nowhere more than like 205, and that's the absolute highest with like Tyron Woodley, and no lower than like 165, right? From 165 to 205, that's a big pool of people. And from 5'8 to 6'2, again, that's a large amount of people. And that's where the entire average species of humans pretty much fit into. So that is also another reason why the lightweight and welterweight divisions have the most athletes. They have more fighters in those divisions than any other division in the UFC. And when you have so many people in those divisions, it's a greater chance to have better fighters. The welterweight and lightweight divisions have a perfect balance. Like you said, perfect balance of technical skill and physical attributes. I mean, lightweights and welterweights can knock out anybody. They're fast, right? They're not as fast as featherweights and bantamweights, but they're way faster than middleweights, right? And because there's a balance with power, speed, other attributes, the skill is also going to be relied on. Whereas the higher weight classes you go to, the less reliant on skill is needed because you can knock out anybody with one big shot. Look at heavyweight, which is the extreme of that spectrum. As long as you have power, you can beat anybody there. This is why you don't see these other athletes come into the sport and do well in the lighter divisions. It's usually the heavyweight division because the physical attributes are so extreme, they can be extremely effective. One big shot and you can knock out anybody because the chins don't get much better as the weight classes go up. That is why the knockouts happen more frequently as the weight classes go up. The power goes up, so do knockouts. That also means that the chins don't get much better to take those kind of punches. Although the skill is more relied in the welterweight and lightweight divisions, it's not as much as the lighter weight classes below because they don't have the finishing qualities that the higher weight classes do. So it's a perfect balance. It's right in the middle. Because the average person can fit in these weight classes, the balance of skill and attributes also takes place there as well. That is a big reason why, in theory, lightweight and welterweight will forever be probably the best divisions. Back in the day when light heavyweight was the best division, that was like when lightweight wasn't even introduced. That was like, and very early on in the sport, not a lot of people did the sport, not a lot of people competed, not a lot of people watched. It was a different reason why light heavyweight was on top. But I think it's going to be very hard for the future of MMA that any other division is going to be over the lightweight and welterweight divisions. The only thing that can is featherweight because a lot of people also fit into the featherweight limits, right? 145. Those guys usually weigh no more than 175 and usually no less than like 155. A lot of people fit in there as well. So featherweight is always right there. Welterweight and lightweight are always probably going to be the top. Great question, man. And then we go to Sean O'Grady. After Greg Hardy's decision loss against Volkov, do you think it's time yet to start feeding him ranked opponents, or do you think he should go back to fighting unranked guys to build up his experience? This is exactly what I was saying before. So good question, and this is exactly what I said before on previous podcasts. Greg Hardy should not be fighting ranked opponents for the next 3 years. It should be 3 years of building him up, fighting unranked guys that are on his experience level and see how he does. And he's doing pretty well. People want to knock him because he's not fighting the best, but he is not one of the best. He's fighting guys that on paper, with their record, with their experience, should be able to compete with him. But because he's beating these guys, he's actually pretty good, huh? And he goes and fights Alexander Volkov. Now, I know a lot of people hate Greg Hardy. And to be honest, I didn't know much about him. Until after his fight, some of you guys sent me on Twitter of what Greg Hardy's done in the past. And yes, they look pretty egregious, but whether you hate him or not, you do have to respect him as a fighter, not as a person. When I talk about these guys, whenever I talk about the fighters, I never try to look at their personal stuff and show respect or something like that, because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of fighters who have done crazy things in the past, but we don't know about. I mean, there's fighters that have been in prison, there's fighters who have done this and that, but we still always want to watch them fight, always respect them, all that stuff. Greg Hardy's done bad things in the past as well. There's been some fighters with a worse history than him. There have been a lot of fighters with a better history than him. But can't look at that when you're looking at the athlete unless you actually want to look at the person, which is something I don't do. Whenever I say I respect someone, if I don't underline the person, it's always going to be the fighter. As a fighter, you have to respect Greg Hardy, man. It's going to be very hard not to. Off of his fight with Ben Sassoli, 3 weeks later, he gets a fight with Alexander Volkov in Russia. And not only that, breaks his hand or his wrist or whatever it was. He's going to be out for 6 months now because of that. And goes to a decision with the guy and actually goes out there and tries. And he didn't really gas out that much, although it looked like Volkov was not going past first gear, because why should he? Why should he put himself in that kind of risk? Look at what we talked about before. Heavyweights can knock you out with any given blow because they have that kind of power. So in heavyweight, it's better to be safer than sorry, especially when you're Volkov, where you could beat this guy by just sticking to first gear and you'll never be caught. But Greg Hardy still was trying to find angles. He still caught Volkov here and there, glancing blows, all that stuff with the experience that he has. And he fought Volkov in Volkov's main area. Volkov has been striking his entire life. If you're sticking on the feet with Volkov, it's very hard to beat him for anybody. For anybody who's ever going to be fighting. It could be Stipe Miocic. It could be Fedor in his prime. It could be even Francis Ngannou, right? It's very hard to beat Volkov on the feet. His biggest weakness is his takedown defense. And Greg Hardy went after Volkov on the feet. Went 3 rounds to a decision, none 10-8 against him. Fought with a broken hand, his right hand, which is his main punch to knock people out with. Still throwing it in the fight. And looked at the fight afterward as a loss. As something he never wants to happen again, because of the competitive nature in himself. You have to give Greg Hardy credit. Many people would not have taken this fight. Many professional elite veterans would never take this fight against Volkov on 3 weeks' notice in Russia. How many fighters have turned down fights because they don't even want to fight the other guy in their hometown, let alone on 3 weeks' notice? And I know a lot of people are going to say, but he's young, he's going to need the money and all this stuff. Greg Hardy's already rich, right? He doesn't need the money. He even said he's not coming to the sport for the money because he's already rich. He's richer than most of these fighters. He's doing it to challenge himself, right? I mean, you could look in boxing with Andy Ruiz and Anthony Joshua. They had this whole thing about, I don't want to fight you in your hometown. I don't want to fight you in your hometown. While Greg Hardy on 3 weeks' notice fighting Alexander Volkov in Russia with a broken hand. That deserves respect, man. As a person in his past, you can't respect that. Although for myself, I am a person who gives second chances and even third if they deserve it. But as for the things he's done in the past in his personal life, that is stuff you cannot respect at all. But as a fighter, what he's done in there and how he's going about himself with this whole MMA career, you have to give that respect. And then we go to, I have no idea how to pronounce that. If the Renan, Covington, and Volkanovski are crowned as new champions, who do you see as the respective nightmare matchups? Interesting, huh? So we'll start with Duranemy. I think it might be Caitlin Vieira, or it might just still be Amanda Nunes. For Duranemy, you need someone who can mix up striking with takedowns and have strong takedowns. More importantly, takedowns from a distance, and I think Vieira is better than Nunes at that. So I might say Vieira, but there's nobody that really creates a nightmare for a GDR, to be honest. As for Covington, to be honest, man, Covington could be a lot of these guys. He could be Masvidal, he could be Woodley, he could be Edwards. Edwards doesn't have a strong wrestling game. He already destroyed RDA, beat Damian Maia. Ponzinibbio will be a hard fight, I think. But is he a nightmare matchup? I don't know. He would beat Stephen Thompson, destroy Nate Diaz, destroy Anthony Pettis, already beat Robbie Lawler, destroys Ben Askren. Vicente Luque will be interesting, but I think Luque doesn't bring the wrestling defense to hold off Covington. Gilbert Burns will be interesting because of his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So that's an interesting one. Jeff Neal, no, Jeff Neal will get dominated. I would say either Ponzinibbio or Burns. But I don't think either are like a nightmare for him. I would say Ponzinibbio is a tough fight because of his takedown defense, and Covington does not want to strike with him at all. Like, at all. He doesn't want to stay on the feet for a second with Ponzinibbio. And Gilbert Burns, yes, he'll probably get taken down, but he would be gladly to go to the ground because of his submission threat. And he has knockout power, but he wings punches, and that's a bad thing. So probably Ponzinibbio, but no one's really a crazy nightmare matchup for him. For Volkanovski, I think it might be Korean Zombie. Ortega would be a very hard fight for him. Zabit would be a tough fight for him, but I don't think he's a nightmare matchup. Rodriguez would be very interesting, and if he's squirmy enough, fast enough, he can get away from anything Volkanovski throws at him. Korean Zombie, he has many ways to go about beating Volkanovski in every exchange. I think he's a better boxer. He has knockout power. He's very fast. He has great grappling. Not strong takedown defense, but his ground game is very dangerous. I don't know if Volkanovski wants to stay on the ground with him, but we have seen Chan Sung Jung get knocked out before. We have seen him get caught before. He's better these days. He's more slick. It's either him or Rodriguez, I think. Rodriguez can be like a mouse where Volkanovski can never catch him, and if Volkanovski ever exposes himself a little bit too much, he can get head kicked at any moment. And then we go to Ned's MMA podcast. How do you think an average fighter from today's generation would do in the Matt Hughes, Rich Franklin era? For examples like James Krause, Andrew Sanchez, guys would never reach the top 10 but are part of the newer era of today. So we'll take James Krause because he just fought, right? He's in our fresh memory. If James Krause went in the welterweight division back then against Matt Hughes' era, I think James Krause will be a top 5 fighter easily, without a doubt. Will he beat Matt Hughes? That's a tough fight because Matt Hughes has superior grappling, but his striking is nowhere near where it should be at, and he didn't really have much of a chin. I would say James Krause will give Matt Hughes all that he can handle, but Krause can also get controlled and beaten on the ground from Matt Hughes. Matt Hughes is a very strong wrestler, great grappler, good submissions, scrambles very well. The only thing is he gets tagged, he gets hurt every time. And Krause is longer, taller than him, might even be like the same size when it comes to weight. So these newer guys, if they go into the older era, they would all be like top 5 fighters, easily. The game has evolved so much from back then. Like in the middleweight division, if you bring in Cesar Ferreira, for an example, into the older era, he would look like a monster. He would be knocking people out left and right. People would think he's like the next all-time great fighter. Way more multi-dimensional than anybody else of that era. Like Hector Lombard, right? Hector Lombard will go out there and just start putting out fools left and right. Might even become champion, you know? So it's not great to compare the older era to the new era whenever people want to say who's better if they fought each other, you know, Chuck Liddell or Jon Jones, right? Rich Franklin or Kelvin Gastelum. There's some that you can when it comes to heavyweights, such as Fedor, right? Fedor can come out there and beat many heavyweights because, again, the skill isn't as reliant. And he's way more skilled than a lot of heavyweights today because he relied on those skills, whereas a lot don't today. So it's a little bit different. When you go to the lower weight classes, it changes the dynamic of it. And then we go to Conor. Max Holloway with one punch knockout power versus Zabit with elite cardio. Zabit beats him. Zabit's only weakness, only vulnerability is his cardio. That's it. Like everywhere else you see him, he could wrestle from far, he could wrestle up close, he could chain wrestle, he can shoot blast doubles, great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, great judo skills, amazing boxing, great kicks all over the place, long and tall, doesn't have power but he has speed to get in and out very safely, great defense and great offense across the board. I would say the other thing is leg kicking defense. I guess that's another hole in his game, but Holloway doesn't go that way. Holloway's shorter, he punches very short, he has good combination punching, but he's not going to be able to get to Zabit that easily without getting countered. He doesn't have the wrestling, he doesn't have the takedowns to get after Zabit, and Zabit can go for a different style, that Sambo style against Max Holloway that Holloway's never fought up against before. Chain wrestling, of course. Many things that Zabit can go after Holloway that Holloway's never fought up against before. And on the ground, it's going to be interesting because how long Zabit is. He can keep people down a lot easier than shorter fighters can because he gets the back so quickly. That's a huge thing. We've seen that against Shayman Moraes. When Shayman Moraes stood up immediately, Zabit instantly squeezed in those hooks and got his back. So I think elite cardio Zabit does beat a one-punch knockout Max Holloway because Zabit really won't give that kind of opening on Max Holloway to land that one-punch knockout. And Holloway, even though he has one-punch knockout in this scenario, he still fights like a combination puncher. So when you're throwing combinations, the way Holloway throws them, he's not committing 100% on every punch. Will he change up his game? Is he going to change his style to land that one punch? It would be something that's more uncharacteristic for Max Holloway to do. So I think Zabit would beat him in this situation because Zabit also has a granite chin. He took shots from Kelvin Cater and Jeremy Stevens, who both have one punch knockout power. So yeah, I think Zabit would win that. Then we go to Sammy J. Fantasy matchups. Okay, C-level Kane versus Prime Fedor. I think Fedor wins. If it goes to the ground, Fedor can submit him. Fedor can also throw Kane down. Fedor has more power, better chin. He's faster. He's more relentless with his power. So I think wherever Kane goes, if you try to strike with Fedor, he might get knocked out. He might get caught. If he goes to the ground with Fedor, he might get submitted. The danger of Fedor is a little bit too high for that. C-level Kane versus Stipe. This is a good fight. I'll actually go with Kane in this one. I think he could throw the leg kicks, the body kicks. His wrestling is going to be maybe equal to Stipe, somewhere around there. But Stipe is slower. He's going to make Stipe work against the cage. Kane could smother Stipe with his boxing and then clinching up against the cage, all that sort of stuff. I think he wins by a decision, probably. And it's a tough fight. It can go either way, but I think Kane might edge that. Romero versus Prime Fedor. Oh man, that would be destructive. Not too different in size either. I'll go with Fedor because I think Romero will gas out. I think Fedor will get beaten up a little bit in those first 2 rounds. Romero does have better striking though overall, but he does gas out. Tough fight to call. I'll stick with Fedor, but it's very tough. GSP versus Usman or Colby. I think GSP beats both of them, to be honest. I think GSP definitely beats Usman. I think he could stop the wrestling or make it as inefficient as possible because of his takedown defense and because of his range, and also keeping that jab on Usman the entire fight. Pick his shots, move around, make it a point fighting contest on the feet, disrupting Usman's setups. And as for Colby Covington, this will be harder because Colby doesn't allow GSP to rest or even establish a jab. So if he could take away GSP's jab, it becomes a lot easier for GSP, but Colby isn't as strong of a wrestler as Usman is, and that's going to be harder to take down GSP, but he can work on GSP. This would be very close. This would be very, very close stylistically on the scorecards, but we have seen Colby get taken down by RDA before. Yeah, I gotta go with GSP on that one. I think he actually takes down Colby and controls him just a little bit, threatens him a little bit, and off of the takedowns after they stand up, he could potentially establish things, and then Colby tries to work his way to pressure GSP again, but probably gets taken down again. So I think GSP will win that, but it'd be very close. Prime Anderson versus Adesanya. I've talked about this before that fight even happened. I think Adesanya beats any version of Anderson Silva, and I think it's going to be very similar to the way they fought before. I think Adesanya can do what Anderson does, but at a higher level. And he's longer and taller. I think he's faster. He has the power to knock on Anderson, but I think it would be very similar to their first fight. Prime Anderson versus Whitaker. I think Prime Anderson will win this one. After seeing how Whitaker fought Adesanya, if Whitaker's swinging wildly at Anderson like he did against Adesanya, mainly because Anderson's keeping that range, Anderson will snipe him. Counter him easily and snipe him. Seeing 1 or 2 of those and Whitaker's going to be out. Oh, I missed this question. Okay, another one of those weird questions, but it has a lot of likes. So, hi Weasel, 2 questions. Number 1, you're an up-and-coming porn director, and you get your choice of 2 MMA fighters to be featured in your first major film. Which 2 fighters are you picking? What? Ngannou and Greg Hardy. No, I'm kidding. Ngannou pounds Greg Hardy. I'm just kidding, man. Number 2, who are your current fighters that could make great future coaches based on their fight IQ and skills? Existing examples: Dwayne Ludwig, Mike Brown. I have a feeling Demetrius Johnson would be a great coach. He seems like he knows everything he's taught and he knows how to apply it to other fighters, because I know he trains fighters as well at his gym, or he helps them out. And I think Daniel Cormier would be a very good coach. I mean, he kind of coaches wrestling. I think as an MMA coach, just in general, he could be really good. So he has really high fight IQ, great skills. But as a coach, you also have to know how to apply a different style too. So I feel like Cormier might just incorporate a very similar style to what he has in other fighters, you know? I don't know anybody else, to be honest. Maybe Tony Ferguson, you know? Create like a school of ninjas. But one thing you do normally notice is the best coaches normally weren't the best fighters. So Dwayne Ludwig, for an example. Mike Brown is probably the best MMA fighter that turned into a head coach, right? He was a former WEC champion. He beat Ryan Faber. Everybody else, you know, from Dwayne Ludwig, even Matt Hume, but he didn't extend his career that far. I know Duke Roufus is the head coach over there, and his brother is usually known to be an amazing kickboxer, but Duke Roufus is the primary head coach out of that family, right? I guess it's true for the most part when they say the people that teach it are usually the people that can't do it. Not necessarily true all the time, because of course, like we said before, we do have Daniel Cormier, and I know other fighters also coach here and there, but generally it seems to be true. And then let's go to the Twitter questions. We're going to start with @RedStripeTima. Should Zabit have one more fight before a title shot? Given his gas tank, it seems like he's not ready for a 5-round fight. Yes, I do agree. I think he should fight the winner of Ortega versus Korean Zombie. Yair Rodriguez is there as well. I know a lot of people would like to see that one. Either or, Yair is more fun, but Ortega versus Korean Zombie, the winner of that makes more sense, because the winner of that might even get a title shot, especially if it's Korean Zombie, right? But Rodriguez did beat Korean Zombie, so either fight, to be honest. I think he needs one more fight, and it needs to be 5 rounds. Then we go to @Darwin Naletti. Hey man, I was thinking, in my opinion, if Fury wants an MMA bout, the UFC needs to put him in there with Gokhan Saki. They are both new to the game, obviously more so Fury, but it makes sense. Instead of putting him in there with a seasoned MMA fighter. Yes, I agree, man. I didn't even think about this, but I 100% agree. Saki's small though, that's the biggest thing. Saki, he's even a small light heavyweight. Fury's a giant heavyweight. It'd be interesting still. I think with the skills that Saki brings in a fight, he can beat Tyson Fury, obviously. I mean, the leg kicks, the knees, everything that comes into it, he has knockout power. I think Fury's going to have knockout power in MMA. That'll be an interesting fight. It makes sense because they're both very much inexperienced, but they are great strikers. I would love to see that one, man. And we have to relax on the Ngannou versus Tyson Fury fight. I do not want to see Tyson Fury get absolutely thrashed in his first fight in the UFC or first fight in MMA. Then we go to at every league. If Ngannou goes berserk and starts knocking out people in the streets, who would stop him? RoboCop. Then we go to at Colorado Eskimo. What percentage do you think likely that Volkanovski beats Holloway? Is honest Zabit ready for the winner? Lastly, if someone taught him grappling and BJJ, would Vasyl Lomachenko make a run for the UFC belt? Prayers for your mom. Thank you so much, man. Interesting question. So I would say Volkanovski has like a 40% chance of winning, maybe 35-ish. And Zabit, I do not think he's ready yet. He needs 5-round cardio because he could be as skilled as he wants. He could be the best fighter in the world. But if you don't have the gas tank for 5 rounds, anybody can beat you. And that's not a good thing. And Vasyl Lomachenko, I think, knows Sambo, or he knows wrestling, or something. I forgot what he knew, and there's footage of him actually competing in some grappling arts. If they teach him grappling and BJJ, I think he can make a run, maybe not for a belt yet, but he can make it into MMA and be the most successful boxer to ever go into MMA, in theory even. Have you ever seen Vasyl Lomachenko kick, too? There's a video of him, I think in Thailand or something. There's a video of him kicking and he has the explosion. The only thing he doesn't have is the turning of the hips. He doesn't have that rotation yet, that dexterity yet, and that's something he has to build up. But the explosion in his kicks, even stepping with the ball of his foot, very impressive. Then we go to at KChunk29. Who would win in an MMA match between Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and Raymond the Real Deal Daniels? My dream. That's what this is. That's my fighting dream right there. I think Daniels is a better striker, but Thompson's been doing MMA for a long time, and he understands the range better. He understands the gloves better. He understands the cage better. That's so tough to call it. I want to say Raymond Daniels. He can get in there very quickly and cash Thompson. And he's also very good with the lead leg as well. And I think he's faster than Thompson is, but he's older. That's the thing. He's a lot older. I'll go with Raymond Daniels. I could be wrong, but I have a feeling he would win. At Man of Truth, why exclude Jon Jones from the GOAT conversations when all the top UFC fighters are on PEDs? Is that true? I only exclude the guys that got caught with PEDs, so I don't really go by speculation. I just go by what we know. So Jones, Silva, they're both off the GOAT list. I mean, Verdum is gone, right? Everybody who has done PEDs, they're off the GOAT list. TJ Dillashaw, off the Bantamweight GOAT list. That's why I say GSP is the greatest fighter of all time. Okay, interesting question by @buttermilk_101. Why are former middleweight champions and Luke and Weidman struggling to crack the light heavyweight rankings when middleweights who couldn't even crack the top 10 in middleweight like Santos and Smith have way more success? It might be a mental thing or a focus issue. When Luke and Weidman went to light heavyweight, what were they focused on? Jones, making it big dreams, big fight, money fight, all this different kind of stuff. When Santos and Smith went there, they took a lot more serious. They were focused on the task at hand. They focused on Jon Jones when they were right there for a title shot, but they treated the light heavyweight division like the middleweight division. I feel like Luke and Weidman saw the light heavyweight division as weak, looked at it as not serious. Oh, look what I did at middleweight. Look what I did to these killers. I fought Anderson Silva, I fought Lyoto Machida, I fought Chris Weidman, Luke Rockhold. I mean, I fought everybody, right? Who are these light heavyweights? Who's Dominic Reyes, right? Who's Jan Blachowicz, who's almost like a gatekeeper? I'm going to run through these guys. I think that's what they had in their mind before moving up to light heavyweight, because they both completely looked over their opponent and looked at Jon Jones. Jon Jones was the guy that was always there. So they potentially thought that Jon Jones is the only good fighter there and underestimating their opponents. And they both get put out viciously. Smith and Santos, I think they took a lot more serious, and they had a real outlook on that division and a real outlook on their career at light heavyweight. They moved up not because I want to fight Jon Jones. They moved up because, one, for Smith, middleweight was killing him to make the cut. So he moved up to a weight class that he belonged to. Santos, a very similar thing as well. Santos is a big guy, and we saw that when he moved up to light heavyweight. And again, they were very focused on the task at hand. And I think that's the biggest thing. And when you have that focus, you're able to train better, train smarter, know what you have to work on, know your opponent, their weaknesses, all that stuff. But when you're put up against an opponent and you're thinking about the next guy, even your training can be halted. And another thing is, Luke Rockhold and Chris Weidman have been knocked out plenty of times at middleweight. Or they've been hurt plenty of times at middleweight, whereas, yes, Smith has as well. Santos has been knocked out before. But I think Luke and Weidman have taken more damage at middleweight. And I realized something about Rockhold and Weidman, and that is, they kind of follow the trend of the sport. Before the McGregor era, before the entire entertainment era, they were a lot more honorable, they were a lot more humble before a fight. Even Rockhold, as arrogant as he is and was, he always kept it down low and showed respect to his opponent, other than Michael Bisping, right? Michael Bisping is the only guy that he had some kind of beef with. Everybody else, it was a lot more cordial. And then once the entertainment era came and he became champion, which is around that time, that is when you start to see Rockhold be a lot more brash and arrogant, and even Weidman talking trash, which is something he's never done before. Remember that press conference when everybody was acting like Conor McGregor and it was a lot of Weidman and Rockhold talking, which for their first fight they didn't do that much? I think they just followed the trend. They understood that McGregor's making money, he's the big thing, so them two kind of followed suit. And they both moved up to light heavyweight after like everybody's moving up a weight class to be a double champion. And that's what they had in mind. They had their sights on Jon Jones and that belt, not on the next contender. So I think that also played a little bit in it. If you look at the psychology of this, they always seem to be following the trend. And that is never a good thing. Just be your own fighter, be your own person. Smith and Santos both went up to light heavyweight, not looking to be double champions, not looking to be the next McGregor, not looking to be this trash-talking fiend, nothing like that. They moved up, want to challenge themselves at a higher weight class where they're more comfortable in, and they felt more confident up there. Isn't that crazy though? Like, without thinking of the explanations, without thinking of the reasons why, just seeing the names Thiago Santos and Anthony Smith as the top best fighters in light heavyweight division, they made it up there, they fought for the belt, they looked good, especially Santos. And when you look at former middleweight champions who were thought to be the greatest middleweights of that era, they go up and they get viciously KO'd. That is actually pretty wild, man. Pretty weird to see. I mean, I've been watching Santos and Smith for a long time. I saw Santos' first fight in the UFC. I saw Luke Rockhold's first fight in the UFC as well. I've seen these four guys progress through the middleweight division since they got into the organization. And Santos and Smith were always looked at as like journeymen. Santos had one run before he got knocked out by Gegard Mousasi. But other than that, nobody really thought much of him. You know, the knockout loss against David Branch was like a nail in the coffin for the fans looking at his career. And Smith just never had anything great going on. And I'm very happy to see them in the light heavyweight division and actually giving Jones some fits. Santos, still to this day, I believe beat him. I still believe Thiago Santos beat Jon Jones. And a lot of people do as well. And for some reason, everybody is ignoring that. Everybody just like forgot about that fight. And I know it's because Jon Jones could have done more. He didn't show everything. And I think that's why a lot of people just kind of ignore that fight. But with Jon Jones not doing much, Santos fought with no legs. What would you rather be? Holding back in a fight or fighting with no legs? I mean, which one will degrade your performance more? I'm pretty sure fighting with no legs, no knees is pretty hard to do, you know? So that's the end of the podcast, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. And if you did, make sure you give it a like. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you were listening to the audio version of this. And again, thank you guys so much for watching. And I'll see you in the next episode.